In my last video, I took a deep dive into regular expressions, what the cool kids call regex. And I said when I did that video that I was going to dive into specific examples of using regex in everyday marketing tasks. So most marketing tools today allow us to use regex. And if you're a little confused about what exactly regex is, first of all, I'm going to drop a link to the blog post and video that I did about regular expressions. But regular expressions, it's really just like any kind of filter or search on roids. So it gives you the ability to, instead of just searching for one thing at a time, like country equals United States or source equals Google or something like that, it gives you the ability to search for multiple criteria at one time. And so you can shoehorn quite a few criteria into a single query using regex. So today we're going to explore using regex in Google Analytics. So one thing to be aware of, I think this change took place maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Any report that you see, most of the standard reports, unless it's like an overview report like this, like I'll pull up my favorite report, the channels report, have this filter here. And now these are by default sensitive to regex. So if I put in something like just a simple regex, direct or display, and this character here is called the pipe character, and that just means or in regex. And so if I just put this in here, I don't even have to go into advanced and choose regex. I can just hit enter or return, and it will give me direct or display. I can get as sophisticated as I want with regex. Google Analytics doesn't accept all of the regex characters, but it does accept most of them. And so you could get pretty sophisticated in here without having to go in and go into advanced and select matching regex, which is what you had to do originally. So let's jump into some real world examples of how you would use regex in regular expressions. So let's go into a content report here. We'll just pull up the all pages report. And a common use for regex is grouping content. Let's say you want to pull up like a list of URLs, but you want to see them as one group. And in this case, I'm not talking about content grouping, which Google Analytics does offer, which we'll touch on. I'm actually talking about taking your, let's say your pages report and grouping it by like maybe categories of your site. I actually do this a lot in BigQuery using SQL, but what I'll do is I'll test my regex in a Google Analytics report. So if I'm trying to figure out, okay, what are the best ways to group the content for this particular site, one of the groupings I might come up with is like an account grouping, let's just say. So I'll just show more lines here. So I might look in here and say, okay, I want to include sign in, your info, and review order and my account. We'll go with that. So at the most basic form, what we can do is say, okay, we're going to go with sign in, but let's just say, for example, that sign in can either show up, well, for URLs, you're not going to have a space, but let's just say there are different variations. So, and I am going to zoom in here so you can really see what I'm doing. So let's just say in different directories of the site, it might have a hyphen or an underscore. And if you don't know what I'm doing here, definitely go and check out my Regex tutorial where I break it down in really simple English. But what this would say is if the page either has a hyphen or an underscore, or let's say that it could also just be sign in as one word, which is what we see right here, then what we can do is put a question mark after it. And then that says this entire grouping, so this hyphen or underscore, I like to think of the question mark as meaning it's optional. So it might be there, it might not be there. So this will capture 3 different versions of sign in. This would capture sign in with a hyphen, or sign in with an underscore, or sign in. And you could do this. This would be absolutely valid. It's just going to be a little slower for BigQuery or a browser or whatever you're working with. It just means more parsing. So anytime that you can simplify your regex, that's going to be more optimal. And that's really where the more experience you get with regex, the more efficient your regex is going to be. So we're going to go back to, in fact, I think I copied it. Yeah. Okay, so we said sign in, or what else? There was account, my account, and I think I said a couple others, or maybe one, your info. We'll just go with those. So we'll say if it contains sign in or your info, or it said my account, but there might be other pages that just use account. So we could do something like this. And then the name of the game here will be to see, 1, is there anything in this list that shouldn't be there? If so, we'll need to kind of hone in our regex a little bit more. And this all looks good, so that's fine. But then what I'll do is I'll go into advanced and I'll exclude exactly this pattern, and then I'll be looking for, okay, did I miss anything? Is there anything in the results? When I exclude that regex pattern, I look and see, oh, you know what? Yeah, order completed. That should really be included. So then I can go back, edit it, include, go in here and include order completed. And there we go. Now I could take this regex and drop it anywhere. Like I would take it and using a case statement in SQL, like the teams I work with, we'll just create segments on the fly in BigQuery, and we rely more on that than like content groupings. But if I wanted to create a content grouping for this, I could certainly do that. So in Google's demo account, you can't access any of the settings like content grouping. So I'll just demo it in mine. Let's see. I have used all of my slots. So I'll go into my test, create a new content grouping, and I could say account pages. And I could use the rule set. Say account. And in this case, I would be using regex. I would be using the page dimension. That makes sense. You do have other options of page title or page screen, but I would just take my regex, drop it in here, and say done and save it. And then that would create a content grouping around those pages. While we're in here, I'm going to demonstrate the extraction option. So I'm just going to hit cancel. And to demonstrate this, I'm going to go back into this account. Let's go to the content drill down report. This is a good report for being able to start at the home page and see how the site is structured. So anytime you see a line item like this that indicates a subdirectory, then you can click on that and drill down to more pages. Typically, if it doesn't have a / at the end, this is just an individual page. And if I click through to it, all it's going to do is isolate that page. So that's not interesting. This is interesting because this is definitely a directory and it contains the most page views. So let's look at this and see what wonders it beholds. There are quite a few pages and subdirectories under here. So there are actually 47 line items. Some of them are subdirectories, some of them are individual pages. You also can tell by the icon here. This icon indicates a page and this indicates a directory. So let's say I want to create a content grouping that I call Google Redesign. And instead of using Regex to identify each of the individual elements in this, we are going to use this other option. Let's go back in here, new content grouping. I'll just say test. And we'll use the extraction option. So this field is also sensitive to Regex. And so the way that we would build this is we would say, okay, look for this directory. So I could just copy this, drop it in. So it's going to start with that. I don't necessarily need the caret, but I'll just throw it in there. It's free. And it's going to say, grab everything that exists between these two /. So how would we do that? Because we only care about the subdirectories. So for this, we need a regular expression that says, look for the first /, only grab what is in between that first / and the next /. So this is going to get a little more advanced, but that's good. That's why you're here. So anytime I want to test my regex, I don't want to test it in the settings, because what if it's wrong? Then you set it up and you get a bunch of junk, and then you have to go back in and change it. So the best place to test your regex, if you're working inside Google Analytics, is the report you're trying to filter. So we'll do that here. We'll say, okay, this page path level 2 has to start with a /. And now we can't say .star. That would just contain everything. And the reason for that is that also contained in there would be a /, because that's part of everything. And we will get more than what we're bargaining for. So what we have to do is we have to use this notation. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more. And if we use square brackets, so let me talk a little bit about this. I did in my tutorial about regex, but I'm just going to touch on it here. Let's say I want to capture words that start with the letter C and then can contain A, O, or U, and then T. That will capture cat, caught, and cut. So that's how you use the square brackets to be able to pick one of multiple options. But if you throw a caret in there, then it means anything except what comes after this caret. So in this case, we're going to say it has to start with a /, and then we're going to have the square brackets. We're going to put a caret in there. And what we're saying is that the next letter or character can be anything except for a /. And you'll see why in a minute. And the reason for that is that if I just put in a .star, then that means that it could be anything. It could be literally any character, but then you're not going to be able to limit it to just that top level directory. So we want to say it can contain any single letter except for a forward slash, and then we're going to put a plus sign after that notation because now we're saying at least one character that can be anything except a forward slash. There has to be at least one. There can be more than one, but there can't be 0 characters. And then it's going to contain another forward slash, and we're going to end with that. So we're going to test this. And sure enough, this returns what we want. Now I could look at all 20 rows and it will just be top level directories. Fantastic. So to extract, we are going to wrap whatever we want to extract in parentheses. And that is going to tell the browser, look for this regex, but I don't want this forward slash and I don't want this forward slash. Extract this. And this will be a handy tool that will come up again and again. Any tool that allows you to extract, Screaming Frog allows you to, Google Sheets allows you to. There are a few tools out there that allow you to not only use regex, but to also extract using regex. And then this is what we would drop into the field. And that would then, for this particular content grouping, you would see this list, except it wouldn't have the forward slashes. You would just be able to group by apparel, lifestyle. No, you could have the forward slashes. If you really wanted the forward slashes, then you would just wrap the parentheses around the whole expression. But I think it tends to be a little neater not to have the forward slashes. Again, your mileage may vary. If you wanted them, you would just stretch out your parentheses and put them before and afterward. Then that would tell the browser, extract this whole thing. And each of these lines would be a line item in that particular content grouping. So where do you see content groupings? Let's see here. If we go into, I'm going to zoom back out. If I go into a content report, now I've largely abandoned my site for the last year or so, so I don't have a tremendous amount of traffic, but you see the content grouping option here. So if I clicked on my blog, then I could drill down and identify different blog pages. If I clicked on my sales pages, I could do that. And that's how you can use content groupings. So in this particular instance, I would have a content grouping that I called Google Redesign or Redesign, whatever would make sense for them. And I'd be able to drill down to these particular categories. And then I could compare the performance of this particular grouping to another content grouping. Okay, another way that you can use regex, and I use regex a lot for this purpose, and that is to clean up your channels. So I can't show this particular client site, so I'm blurring out their identity, but I am going to go into, I'm just in the view settings, and I went to look at the channel grouping. So I clicked on channel settings, channel grouping. You need to have edit access to be able to view these. And I'm going to look at their default channel grouping because I know that if I go into their other channel, and I've talked about this in other blog posts and other videos, but the other channel is basically Google's junk drawer. So if you're using campaign tagging and you don't use the sources and mediums that Google recognizes, it just dumps that traffic into the other channel. It's a really good channel to check because a lot of times there's really good data in this channel. And so what I'll do is I'll come in here and I'll change source to medium, and I'll look to see, okay, which mediums is Google not recognizing? And notice here, there's email, and you think, that's weird because Google should recognize the email channel. Well, the reason it doesn't is it's a capital E. So we're going to go in and we're going to change that. But we're also going to expand the email channel to also include Postman. I know that these are emails, as well as member message and custom newsletter. So these are all emails. And we're also going to do something else with email. So I'm not actually going to make these changes live, but I'm going to come in here to the default channel grouping and select email. And this just has the system defined channel. This is what you'll see if you haven't touched it in any way. If you've customized it, then you'll see system and user defined. And if it's a totally custom channel, you'll just see user defined. And so here I would go in, and the first thing I would do is I would say medium, and I never use exactly matches because then it's case sensitive, and there's just no good reason to use exactly matches. I remember years ago there being one client where their URLs were just really jacked up, and I had to use exactly matches one time as part of one filter. And the entire time I've been in analytics, that was the only justifiable use of exactly matches. So just changing this to matches regex, even if you don't use regex in this field, it will make it so that it's not case sensitive. So we could change this to email. Now we're going to drop a pipe character, which just means or, and we're going to add in newsletter, or what was the other one? Postman and message. So we'll say Postman or message. And now the email channel will be expanded to include these items. Now, this will just be moving forward. So when you customize the default channel grouping, it doesn't affect historical data. There is a way to affect historical data, and I'll touch on that. But in this case, we're modifying the default channel grouping, which you want to be very, very, very careful doing. You always want to make sure you test your regex before you do this. But there's another item I'm going to add in here, and that is, so sometimes if you checked an account source, and I'll look for mail or Outlook. And what this will do is it will pull in, I figured it's a pretty clean account. And they also don't do a whole lot with email marketing. If you look for this in just about any other account, what it will do is it will pull in web email referrals. And it's just a good way to add additional traffic to your email channel. So if you don't tag links in email, the vast majority of that traffic is going to show up as direct. And that's just because desktop apps, secure email providers, and mobile apps do not send referral data. So if you are not adding UTM parameters, and I have a blog post, I actually have a guide about using campaign parameters as well as a video. So if you haven't checked that out, I'll drop a link in the blog post. But if you don't tag every link that points to your site in your emails, that traffic is going to show up as direct, the vast majority of it. There will be a little trickle of traffic that will come from webmail providers that aren't set to default to a secure server. So if you go to Gmail, you're going to see the little lock icon in the browser, and the URL would start with HTTPS instead of HTTP. There are some older email providers, or if the email provider just like made it an opt-in to secure email, then some people didn't understand that option. And so you will see a trickling of webmail traffic, but it tends to be pretty sparse. However, because this is a valid addition to make, we're going to go in here and we're going to say, or if the source matches mail, so that's going to include webmail.com and other variations of mail and Outlook. And then I could click done and click save, and that will customize by expanding our email channel. But let's say that you don't want to expand a channel, you want to create a new channel. So I had a client once I was working with, and they wanted to create a channel from review sites. So what I did was I went out and just scraped a whole bunch of consumer review sites. And I'm going to show you a couple different ways that I use. They're just like little hacks that enable you to easily take a list of URLs like this if you wanted to create a custom channel. I also did this for coupon sites once, and I had another client, they did a lot of press releases. So I went out and grabbed a whole bunch of press releases and created a press release channel using the regex from these scraped URLs. But one way that I can easily convert this to regex, because I don't want to go in here and, just add in a whole bunch of pipe characters, that would be pretty exhausting. So Google Sheets has a function that Excel doesn't have. I wish it did, but it's called the join function. And what the join function needs, two parameters. One is what is the delimiter that you want to use to join the items in this particular array, and then what is the array or the group of cells. Well, we want to join it on the pipe character, and we are going to point it to this cell, and then I'm just going to press Command Shift down arrow. If you're on Windows, Control Shift down arrow, and that will select all of the contiguous cells that contain text. And then I'll just do that, and boom, here we go. Now we have a list of regex. But this is a function, so I'm just going to Command or Control C to copy, paste it, and then I'm going to select values only. And now I could drop this in here, so I could just copy and paste this in, but technically the dot character is a reserved regex character, and it just means any one character. That's why, like, the wildest of wild cards is .star, because that means any one character and 0 or more of those characters. So it is the hungriest of caterpillars when it comes to regex. But is there going to be any other character between BBB Online and .org? Probably not. But if we want to be super, super careful, what we could do is just a search and replace. We could just say, okay, find every instance of a dot and replace it with a backslash. So that's how you escape something that is a regex character, and replace all. Sure. I'm actually going to undo this, and now we have our regex. We've escaped all of the periods, and we have the pipe characters in between. Now I could drop this in here. I could say I want to define a review channel, and this would be based on source, not on medium, You want to make sure you change this to matches regex, and you just drop it in, assign it a color. I'm not sure what colors are already used. Probably the light blue is probably already used. I might go with a light gray. I try to use up all the lighter options before the darker ones, just because if you're looking at a report that uses these colors, it really jumps out at you that it's a custom channel. However, that might be preferable. You might really want your custom channels to stand out. But now I would just click done and then save, and then I would have a review channel. Okay, so there is one other way that I use sometimes, and if you're not comfortable with Google Sheets, or maybe you're working in a Microsoft organization and you don't have access to Google Sheets, another option that's also really easy is Microsoft Word. So you can drop the list in here, keep text only. Oops. Yeah, I shouldn't have done that. That's right. I was going to undo that. Okay. So I'm going to start again. Again, Command Shift down arrow or Control Shift down arrow if you're on Windows. And I'm going to paste, keep text only. And now what I can do is you can click this little show hide button and it will show you the paragraph returned. Now, typically that is going to be what separates lines. Sometimes it's not the carriage return, it's actually like line break or something like that. But then once you know what it is, you can Command or Control F, and I'm just going to pull up the replace option so I can see both here. And the way to identify the paragraph character is with a caret and then P. And you can see all the matches. There's 75 matches, so that's a good sign. But what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, identify all the paragraphs and replace them with a pipe character. Okay. It happened in stages. But if you go this route, then what you absolutely have to do is you have to grab that last one and delete it. If you drop in, and I've made this mistake before, and this is part of the reason you always want to test your regex before you set up any kind of setting. If I put this into a field and said matches regex, it would actually match all sources, because this makes it just like a wild card. So you always want to make sure you remove that. I could say also look for all of the periods. Let's try that again. And replace it with a backslash period and replace all. And now I have perfect regex that is ready to be dropped into Google Analytics, and we already have it in here. But again, I've been burned with this, so I always just double click to select everything and then press the right arrow to get to the end, just to make sure that there's not a pipe character, because you just don't want that in there. Okay. So then you would click done and save, and at this point moving forward, you would have access. Now, if you don't want to alter your default channel grouping, you could create a copy of this. I'm going to do this in mine. Let me go into channel settings. I'm in my test account, so it is fine. I could go here, I could create a copy, and I would just change the name, and I could call this custom channel grouping, and then I could drop in review, change this to matches regex, drop it in there, give it a color, click done, click save. Now, people aren't reviewing my site. I'm not sure why it did that, but I see it listed in there, so that is fine. And then I could go into my site if I actually had review traffic, and I could apply this to historical data, and that would populate. Now, the benefit to this is that you could go in, clean up your channels, and actually see how your traffic would be redistributed with your newly defined channels. The disadvantage to custom channel groupings is they are not available via the API. So I build out all of my dashboards using either Python or Tableau. I always need the Google Analytics API, so custom channels are pretty useless to me. Okay, so another way you might want to use Regex is in redefining another channel. So one thing that can be really problematic in Google Analytics is it doesn't recognize all of the search engines. Sometimes it doesn't recognize DuckDuckGo. I think that's more these days for international sites. I know with my site, Google does recognize DuckDuckGo as a search engine, but it still doesn't recognize Ecosia. So you could go into your default channel grouping and even expand the definition of organic search. So I could go in here and I could say, okay, it either matches the system defined channel or let's say if the source matches DuckDuckGo.com or Ecosia. Ecosia is actually a really cool search engine. It plants trees based on the number of searches that are done. So I could open up the definition of organic search by doing something like this. Okay, so what else can we use Regex for? Well, you can use Regex in segments when you're creating a segment. So let's say that I am a publisher site and I'm trying to determine market interests that would be good to advertise on my site. So I had a client once and I was mucking about in their Google Analytics and I saw, wow, there's a really strong interest for car insurance for among the visitors of their site. So I passed that on to them and I said, hey, you know what? You should target car insurance. Now, so how did I know that? Okay, well, you can go into audience, interests, and you could go to affinity category or in-market segments. Both of these are actually really interesting. So I'll look at in-market segments here and just kind of scanning through this list. This makes sense. It makes sense that my target audience would be into business and marketing. So I might want to create some regex to see, okay, well, what other fruit can I shake from this tree? So I'll just say, okay, I want to look at business or anything that contains market. All right. So I might look here and say, oh, okay, well, web services, that's another good one. SEO, and I might find something like advertising. And then I could take that and drill down and identify more patterns. Also, affinity categories. This tends to be like a little more whimsical. So this is looking, and there was a gap in the data. It was just a fluke in Google Analytics. It wasn't specific to my site. But this tells me like overall, like the interests of people who also spend money in my site. So if I'm a publisher, I would not be looking at revenue per se. I'd be looking at, okay, well, are there blocks of users who have a particular interest? Like, let's say I'm a site like BuzzFeed or something like that. I might want to dive into like media or TV or entertainment. Now, that's probably not going to be as much my audience. But yeah, okay, so now I could get more ideas. Do I also want to target gamers or book lovers? And you could drill down and you could look at the types of content that they look at, so you might find like a particular site category that attracts more people with these interests. There's just so much you can do with this, and you can triangulate this data with other third-party data sources of information like this. So I just touch on a few examples, but once you understand the principles of regex, really you want to be looking for any opportunity to create regex. So like if I wanted to create a filter for a particular view, or if I wanted to make it account wide or property wide, I could go into account or property, but I could go in here and add a filter, and these filters, let's choose custom here. These filters all have this option of, if it just says filter pattern, it's already sensitive to regex. But some filters you can choose between contains, starts with, ends with. But why do that when you can go right to regex, especially once you really feel comfortable with regex? So you can use regex in filters. You can use regex in segments. So let's say I wanted to take this and I wanted to create a segment. So I would just click up here to create a new segment and then choose new segment. And I could say media lovers. And I always go right down to conditions. You have a lot of options that are baked in. I just like to just go right to the conditions. And here I would choose affinity category, and I would choose matches regex and drop in that regex. And you can choose between sessions or users. I gravitate more towards sessions. You can also choose include or exclude. Sometimes it's easier to exclude than to include. And now if I click save, the nice thing about segments is that I'm not reliant on a filter. Any report that I look at in Google Analytics will only include media lovers so that I can see kind of what they do. Obviously, they don't spend a lot of money on my site, so I wouldn't target them. But I'm also not a publisher, so I wouldn't have a whole lot of use for this. But you might want to do something else with this data. Like, let's just say I'm really curious how the younger people are performing on my site. So I might look at, let's look at this age breakdown. So the most popular age group on my site is 25 to 34, and then surprisingly 18 to 24. So let's just say I wanted to combine them. Well, I could go in here, I could create a segment. I could say, let's see, basically 25 to 34 or 18 to 24. Hopefully I'll remember that. And create a new segment and call them young people, and go into conditions. Select age, matches regex, and before you have anything in there, if you just click in that field, it will give you a list of some of the options, and I'll just select 25 to 34 or 18 to 24. And now if I click save, now any report I look at in Google Analytics is just going to include traffic from that younger audience. So if I looked at a geo report, I would see, okay, where are the younger people mostly coming from, et cetera, et cetera. So there are lots of reports and lots of settings where you can use regular expressions. Hopefully, some of these tools will empower you to use them.